Thanks for joining us today. This is Get Started with Essential Physics. This is part one of two webinars, and today we're focusing on the program components of Essential Physics, which is the ebook and the associated electronic resources that are provided with the ebook, both in ebook and online. So, as I said, this is part one of two. Today's focus is on books and resources. We have a part two webinar that will continue where we left off in this one, and that's going to focus on hands-on investigations with sensors. Each of these sessions is being offered multiple times of August through early September, and you can register for upcoming sessions or view prior recordings once they are posted at our training website at pasco.com/training. And I'll ask Kane to post that in the chat if you want to make sure you're registered for any future sessions, including one that will be starting in just 4 hours for part two. So what is the agenda for our part one session today? Well, we're going to first take a look at the Essential Physics program as a whole and look at its components. Then we're going to take a look at the student textbook and associated ebook and look at what's provided to students in both of those. And then we're going to look at the teacher version of those books and resources so that we can learn what types of resources are available to support you, the teacher. Finally, if time permits, we're going to do a quick demonstration. Today's demonstration will focus not primarily on sensors, that's part two, but throughout today's session, you're going to see that even if you don't have PASCO sensors, there are many opportunities to do activities and investigations with students, whether they are hands-on investigations without sensors or they are investigations that use simulations embedded in the teacher book. So I'd like to ask a quick poll question here and ask you what your experience level is with the Essential Physics curriculum program. So you should see in a moment a poll that asks which best describes your experience level with Essential Physics 3rd edition curriculum. And there are 3 options. I can see some of you are answering already. Thank you for that. The options are first, just looking for now. Second, we've adopted it, but I haven't used it yet. And the third option is I've already used it in class with students. So it looks like most attendees have already responded. Let me give you a few more seconds to respond there if you wish. And when I end the poll in just a moment, I'll share the results and we can get a look at what sort of range of experiences we have. All right, so let me go ahead and end the poll and share the results with you. And you should be able to see from those results that it's pretty evenly split between the first and third categories. Half of you are just looking for now. Fantastic, welcome. We invite your questions today, and you're going to see many resources and websites that you can visit to learn more about it, including, of course, today's webinar. And the other half of you have already used it in class with students. Fantastic. We invite you to share your experiences in the chat of what's gone well, and of course, ask questions about the deeper things that you want to learn about. Thank you for responding to that poll. All right. So first, a quick overview of the entire program. What do we mean by Essential Physics program? Well, it's many components. One of those components is a student textbook. The student textbook is the physical textbook that we'll take a look at shortly here. The next component is a corresponding student ebook or electronic book that has all the contents of the student book and adds a student physical book and adds more beyond that. Corresponding to the student ebook is a teacher version of the ebook that's full of resources to support you as a teacher to deliver the content of the book. And we'll take a look in detail at those resources available to you. There is an infinite test bank that allows you to generate test questions of infinite variety. And then there is a support mechanism online that includes, that is the PASCO Academy. And we think of the PASCO Academy as both a professional development, where you can learn about how you might deliver a particular investigation or lesson in essential physics. And we'll talk about it as also a support for students who are absent. They can look at the content of this Physics Academy and essentially see a lab being done that they might have missed because they were absent, or you might even be able to use it to support the equivalent of the performance of a lab when you are absent. So we'll see what's in the Physics Academy to support you as well. There's also a physical component here that includes equipment kits, and some of the equipment kits, or all the equipment kits, include sensors and other apparatus. Those sensors work with our SparkView software. So the equipment kits and SparkView software will be the focus of part two's webinar, but in this part one, we're going to focus on this top row here, where we're looking at the student textbook, corresponding ebook, and then teacher resources, both in the ebook and online. Now, there are now two ways to access much of this content. One of those ways is the traditional way, which we'll focus on today. But I also want to note that about a month ago, we were delighted to release the PASCO portal. And the PASCO portal houses many of these same resources in a way that's a little more amenable to modern distribution means and use in LMSs. So throughout today's session, I'm going to show you how to do things the traditional way that works for everybody. And if you happen to be a portal user, I'll also show you what resources are available there. So we're going to begin with a quick note of one of the unique features of Essential Physics, and that's the integration of investigations within the book. So I'd like to flip open the book here to page 8, which is in chapter 1. And as we go through the book, you'll see it's a full color book. And what's notable is that we have investigations embedded within it. So as soon as we get to page 5 here, there's an investigation called Graphs of Motion that uses a smart cart. That's going to be featured in part 2 since it uses a cart. But as students continue through this chapter that introduces the domains of interest to physics, they get to another investigation, 1B, musical sounds. And I know you can't see it particularly well here, but what I want to do is go ahead and show you that in the book, on page 8, there is the student lab, the investigation 1B, right embedded in that content of the chapter. So in a moment, we're going to take a look at that. But when you reach this so early in the year, on page 8 of the textbook, your students are hopefully intrigued. They see a little piano there, and they might be intrigued by, well, what is sound? How can sound contain information? And how do we view that using modern analysis tools? And they may say, hey, are we going to do this? And this particular activity looks pretty straightforward. I'm going to jump to it in the textbook right now. So I'll jump over to the electronic version of the textbook. And if we go to page 8 here, we're going to see that the physical book, which you can see in the video, has the corresponding ebook page here. And if we look closely, we'll notice that the part 1 and part 2 of this investigation are accompanied by an interactive simulation. So the interactive simulation button is available for many investigations that aren't merely physical. So this interactive simulation is going to allow us to actually do some things in the ebook without installing any additional software. So this is merely running in the browser. So I'm going to launch that interactive simulation, and we'll see that it's going to give us the opportunity to essentially play keys from the keyboard and take a look at the pressure versus time waveform from those sounds. So I'm going to go ahead and turn a few things off here and then turn it on and ask if you can hear this. Okay, is that coming through? Fantastic. All right. So the investigation that's in the background here asks students to explore the keyboard and take a look at what varies with what they can hear as they go up and down the keyboard keys, and crucially, what does the corresponding sound pressure level waveform look like? Turn it off for a second so you can hear me a little better. And essentially, they can go in and answer questions like, well, how long is a period in this pressure waveform? And we can change the scale of the graph, time axis here to get a better look. So let me turn this back on and go through some of these. And of course, this isn't a chapter on sound. It's just a hook to get students interested in one of the domains that's covered later in the book, sound. The investigation continues, asking students to explore perhaps multiple sounds at the same time. And this could get a little cacophonous, which is part of the investigation here. So we can take a look and see, are there notes that sound good or not good together? In this case, we have a C sharp and a C sharp. And we can take a look at the octaves apart. So this investigation is fairly straightforward, and if I close the actual simulation there, you can see that pretty much all the guidance that students would need in terms of questions, investigation steps, and notes on the simulation features are right here in the book. So that's an example of an embedded investigation that requires no additional physical equipment. It's included inside the textbook. Now, you continue the year and you get to chapter 2, and when you get to page 59, you'll notice that there is yet another investigation. And this investigation is again one that is interactive. It's a simulation in the book, so no additional equipment is needed. But I'm going to jump to page 59 here in the book, and we're going to see that this one's a little more complex, and it might not immediately be clear that this is something you could do without additional supports. It's something about graphical relationships and seeing how in physics we can determine the relationship between two variables by plotting them and finding a mathematical relationship. There's some information here in the student book. There is the interactive simulation, which you can explore. But at this point, I'm hoping you're thinking back to that webinar you attended right about now, and you'll learn later today there are a lot of resources to support both you and your students to do the investigations that are embedded in the book. So let me just give you a quick preview of these, and this will be the focus of our webinar today. Where are these resources and what are they? Well, there aren't only questions here in the book. There's a teacher version, and in the teacher version, there are sidebars we'll learn how to get to that have additional resources. And those resources include the following. It includes a lesson plan to let you know the context for this investigation, the materials, if any, that are needed, none for this since it's a simulation, questions you can ask to set it up, key points that you want to check for students' understanding. So besides the lesson plan, you will see that there is a video where a teacher guides you, another teacher, through the fundamentals of this investigation, talking once again about its context and how to actually do it, the physical button pressing of it. There's also a set of slides that can introduce the topic, and the slides themselves provide additional information that you could project as students are doing this investigation to help support the button presses, the mechanics of it. There's also crucially a student handout that is an editable format or a printable format that guides students through these questions and provides them a place to answer the questions that are otherwise just presented in the student book. And finally, there's a teacher key that corresponds to the responses expected for the student handout. So there are a bunch of resources to help you support your students through these investigations. I'll just quickly show you. In this investigation, we are trying to find the relationship between various sets of data, the first of which is distance versus time. And students are guided with all those resources to go through and take a look at what model might best describe the relationship between these. This looks fairly linear, and they could begin to explore and see that, well, maybe that could change it. And to help their assessment, you see that it gives them a score out of 100 for the particular fit, the quality of the fit to the data that's presented. So I think I'll have to increase the slope here. 3, getting better, 86. And let me clear once more, I think 4, much better. All right, so we can see that indeed it appears there's a linear relationship between these two parameters, and we can go through and change which data we're plotting, which is what's guided through the investigation, and take a look at how we can model each of these particular types of relationships. Again, as a preview of what's done in physics throughout the textbook, pulling it back in chapter 2 and just looking at what do we do? How do we make measurements? How do we reach conclusions in science? All right, so that's a preview. Again, today's webinar is going to focus on where these resources are and a little more detail about what they are. Kane, any questions so far? Great. All right. Again, please ask questions in the Q&A or make any comments in the chat. So I'm going to go back to the textbook here very briefly. I understand it's not easy to see, so we're going to jump away from it very quickly. But if we look at the table of the contents of the textbook, we're going to see that Essential Physics is organized into 8 units. It's a fairly traditional flow and an introductory physics course. And each of those units is divided into 2 or more chapters. The chapter flow is also fairly standard. The authors like to point out one thing that they've done that is not always standard is that they put electricity in circuits as the introduction. This is supported by the equipment and the goal of, instead of starting with abstract fields, which are introduced in later chapters, let's begin with some hands-on experience with current and electricity through circuitry. All right. So there again is that table of contents. Thanks, Kent. Each of the 8 units is divided into chapters. And if I flip over here, we can see that each of the units is divided into 2 to 4 sections. This will become clearer once we jump into the actual ebook. As we've begun to see, there are investigations incorporated into the program. And some of those investigations are engineering design projects to get students to think about the application of the topics that they're learning into engineering design. All right. So let us jump away from the physical book for a moment and look at the corresponding student ebook. The ebook we'll learn how to get to in a moment, but short answer, so the first concept to know about the ebook is that any content that you find in the physical textbook is also available in a one-to-one match in the student ebook. So if you were to turn in the physical book to say page 531 and turn in the ebook to 531, they match. So there's a correspondence, and you could have a mix of students in the class, some of whom are looking at the physical book, and you say, let's take a look at the first paragraph on page 17. Anyone who's in the ebook could also do the same thing on that corresponding page. So everything in the textbook is in the ebook. However, the ebook is not just a static PDF of the textbook. It's interactive, as we've already seen through the example of a couple of simulations that are embedded in the ebook. Doesn't require any additional software because the ebook runs in any modern browser on any computing device, including the phones that your students may have in their pocket. So it runs everything from a phone up to a desktop computer, and all it requires is a modern browser. And there's no software installation required for the ebook, so the simulations that we just saw are all simply HTML5 supported in modern browsers. So how do we get to the student ebook? Well, the ebook is available online at education.pasco.com. So let me jump over there. And when you get to education.pasco.com, you're going to see big tiles for our two essential textbooks. What you will initially see when you get to this page is what you see on the essential chemistry side, in that it will request an access code to actually access the content. I've already entered that access code for essential physics, so we can see that I'm logged in as a student, and I can choose to open the book, as we will shortly. But let's talk a little bit about that access code. The access code is purchased by a school or district for all the physics students at that school or district. It is essentially an alphanumeric code. It's going to look something like this, where A represents some letter and the hash represents some number. And I've noted in the middle here, it says EP3 for Essential Physics 3, SB for student books. So that's how you know when you see this code that this is a code for the student book. It's licensed for a specific number of simultaneous student users and a number of years, over a number of years, often 5 to 7 years. And it's not associated with individual students. So if you have 200 physics students in 11th grade physics, as those students move out of that, the next 200 students who come in the next year use the same key. So it's a number of simultaneous student users. Once you paste in that code, and students paste it in, you'll be able to open the book. So that's the standard way to access the book via the website education.pasco.com. If you've been with the program for a long time, you may recall that previous URLs were used, like student.pasco.com. All of those have been redirected to go to this new site, education.pasco.com, in the past year or so. I mentioned that education.pasco.com is the standard way to access it. Some of you may be using the portal or now or in the future. If you have purchased a number of seats of the student book for your school or district, then the portal itself will provide a convenient way where you can launch the student ebook, view the student access codes, and even share a link for the student ebook with students. In either case, whether you're using education.pasco.com or the portal, this is how students can get into the book. I should explain the portal in a little more detail. This portal launched about a month ago, rather, and it's the response to the increasing need in schools and districts to integrate the resources that you use to teach with the modern LMS and SSO systems that you use in a secure school computing environment. So the thing that the portal will give us in the context of today is the content that we're going to see in the electronic books is also distributed via the portal. And it allows districts, IT groups, to have students directed to access the ebook, for example, through SSO or single sign-on. So you don't necessarily have to use the codes that I've described in the previous slide. And it also allows the integration of LMS, or learning management systems, so that the content, the slides, the handouts that I've previewed and that we'll look at more today can be pushed to common LMSs. It also supports the kind of hybrid SSO LMS Google Classroom. So if you're interested in learning more about the portal, I invite you to go to pasco.com/portal. And I think Kane will put that in the chat here. In today's presentation, I'm going to have a blue bubble whenever I talk about something from the perspective of the portal. All right, so let me open up another poll question here briefly. And this question is, if you have essential physics, which of these access methods do you use or will you be using in the coming school year? Are you going to go to education.pasco.com and use those student access codes, or are you a subscriber to the portal? I didn't mention, but the portal works on a year subscription model, and it's a very affordable subscription for all the teachers at a particular school site. All right, I see the responses coming in. As before, I'll share these responses in a moment once we get them. And I understand that the half of you who are just looking for now won't have a response to this particular question. So it looks like looks like the responses are just long. Thank you for these responses. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results here. And we can see that many of you don't know. That's perfectly understandable if you're not using the program yet or the semester is just beginning. This is something you can ask your science supervisor or IT folks about how to help your students get access and how you will be getting access. We have a 14% using the education.pasco.com site. This is the one you see at the left here, where we're using access codes, and about 30% using the PASCO portal. Great. I'll stop sharing that. Thanks for your responses. So as I mentioned, when we go through today, I'll be looking and describing the education.pasco.com methods, but I'll also allude to the existence of same content in the portal and any additional content that the portal provides. So let's head back to the student book and talk about navigating through the student ebook. And in addition to navigating the ebook, we're going to talk about the content of a chapter and the structure of a chapter in both the physical book and the ebook itself. So I'm going to head over to education.pasco.com, where I have my student login code. I'm going to press open book, and it's going to bring me to the homepage of the Essential Physics textbook for students. There are some buttons here. What I want to do, though, is begin by just saying we went to page 59 earlier when we were doing this investigation 2B. So we know that this corresponds to the same content that's in the book, but of course can enhance it with things like simulations. Let's talk about navigation. And so far, you've already noticed that there are two different navigation schemes. One of those is when we are at the home page, and another is when we're within a chapter. Many of these buttons are the same, but since you're usually in a chapter, I'm going to focus on that initially. So if we are interested in looking at chapter content, we can go to the chapter button, and it will allow us to navigate anywhere in the book by the chapter level or the section level. So if I'm interested in chapter 4, which I'm going to use as a model, I'm going to press chapter 4 to jump to chapter 4 acceleration. And let's take a look at the content of a chapter and the structure of a chapter, whether you're using the ebook as I'm demonstrating now or using the physical book. So I'll shrink this a little bit so we can get a better view. Each chapter starts with kind of a context page that tries to get students interested in the topic of the chapter in the context of some real world situations, in this case, G-forces in airplanes and roller coasters, to associate with this challenging concept of acceleration, which is covered in chapter 4. Now, the ebook is in a browser, so we can navigate using the traditional browser tools. If I hit the back button in my browser, and I want to note this is my browser, it's going to go to the page I was previously on, and I, of course, hit the forward button. But since we are in an ebook, we also want to know how to essentially flip pages. And for that, we have back and forward page buttons at the top and the bottom of the screen. So if I want to go forward to the next page, by the way, I can see the current page up here, 106. If I go forward one page with this arrow, I can go to 107. And if you happen to be reading this on a touch screen, you can swipe left and right. I'm on a non-touch screen, but I have a keyboard. So an alternative mode of navigation is to press the right and left arrow keys on my keyboard. So all of those will let us flip from page to page. So every chapter's second page is a chapter study guide. The design of the Essential Physics book is to begin with the end in mind. So what should a student expect to get out of this chapter? The chapter study guide, which is the second page of each chapter, provides a chapter summary, lists the learning objectives of the chapter, lists the investigations embedded within it, and provides an index. And you'll notice something curious about this. The index shows every page in the chapter, and we'll see why when we look at the structure of the chapter in a moment. It also provides important relationships from which we can see that this is an algebra-focused course, and then the vocabulary introduced within the chapter. I'm going to go forward to the next page, page 108, and this is the first content page of chapter 4. Now, we knew that there are sections within a chapter, and whenever you get to a section, you're going to see the name of that section and a number. So we can see this is section 4.1, the first section within chapter 4, and its focus is on the concept of acceleration. If we want to see how many and what sections are available in the chapter, we can return to that chapter button, which will show us within the current chapter that we have two sections here, two content sections. There's 4.1 acceleration and 4.2 gravity and free fall. So we can navigate between chapters using the chapter button and see the sections within our current chapter there. So essential physics uses the concept of chunking. It's going to break it down from unit to chapter to section, and it continues beyond that. Why was the index providing a single page for each topic? Well, it's because each page presents just a single topic, tries to focus students' attention and let them know what they should be getting from the page. So in a blue headline, you will see the topic of a particular page. And if I go forward, you'll see acceleration of motion graphs as the next page's topic and understanding acceleration after that. If we return, though, we can see that this is the topic per page, and it's chunked even further than that. Every paragraph has a label in the sidebar that says this is what you're going to get out of it. So students can use this for self-assessment. Do I understand how we describe changes in velocity before and after they read that paragraph? All right, so that's an example of the chunking, and I'm going to page forward a few pages here, and we can see the topic for each page, acceleration on motion graphs, followed by understanding acceleration, positive and negative acceleration and velocity. I'm going to pause here on page 112, which is about determining acceleration, and note that we know as physics teachers, one of the keys is getting students to understand how to resolve problems and think like a physicist. And so we have example problems work throughout the text where the question is asked, and then we help students to break down determining what's asked, what's given, what relationships are relevant, and how the solution can be worked out. And we're going to see that structure throughout the book. All right. So let's page forward here. And here we can see on page 113 an investigation, as we saw earlier, embedded within the book itself. And if we want to jump to a page that isn't just to the left or right of this one, we can go to the jump button. I'm going to jump forward to page 120 and hit the enter or return key. And here we can see another theme of essential physics, and that's trying to associate physics with other domains of study of knowledge. In this case, it tries to gives us a translation between the math that students may be doing in algebra class regarding quadratic equation, and it makes the connection to those similar equations in the form of the kinematics equations in physics. So we're going to see in a moment, there are some buttons up here that allow us to look at what associations are made with mathematics, engineering, technology, and science throughout the book. Here's one example of that. I'm going to go forward one page here, and this is the end of the section, number 1. In chapter 4, and every section end has a section review that includes a text description summarizing the section, the vocabulary words introduced, the key equations introduced, and then some review problems or questions that allow students to assess their understanding as we go through this chapter. Finally, I'm going to go to the end of the chapter. I can either type page 127, or if I select the problems button, it's going to go to the end of the chapter beyond all the sections to the end of chapter problems. So every chapter ends with a set of problems. And these are divided into 4 types. There are vocabulary questions, conceptual questions, and you'll see that each of these is divided by section. And then quantitative problems, usually the biggest section in the end of chapter problems. And the final section within the questions is standardized test practice to allow students to get familiar with the type of multiple choice questions they might see on standardized tests. I'm going to go back to some of the quantitative problems. And one thing to note is that the difficulty is rated from 0 to 3 chilies, 0 being the most straightforward and 3 being the most challenging. So you can see the authors must have been eating a lot of Mexican food when they were writing the book. All right. So that is a summary of the chapter structure and content that is shared between the physical book and the ebook. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the navigation tools that are available to us in the ebook. I've already alluded to these buttons that allow us to look at content within the chapter that connect to other science, technology, engineering, and math concepts. So if we wanted to head back to that quadratic equations, I can select math. And each of these buttons, the STEM buttons, are connecting us to content within the current chapter, chapter number 4. And if you select one of those, it's going to jump you to that page and highlight the relevant content in yellow so you can focus in on what it is pointing you to. The investigations within a chapter also have a dedicated button. If I click on the investigations button, we can see that there are 2 investigations embedded in chapter 4, and I can jump to either of them directly here. There is a search button. So of note, this search button is across the book. So if I were looking at interested in something like friction, it's going to do search across the book, unlike the other buttons, which are chapter specific. And it's not just a raw text search that would be overwhelming for a popular word like friction. Instead, it's a search of the indexed content. So if I was interested in a definition of friction, I can see and jump directly to that anywhere in the book. And of course, use my browser back button to get back to that previous page. There are also buttons for video and interactives. These, of course, are unique to the ebook, and we're going to take a look at that in a little while as we look at interactive content. But that's another way to navigate to specific content within the chapter. I'm going to return home by going to the home button. And here we're going to see many of those same buttons we just covered. But what's notable about these buttons in the lower row is that when you are on the home page of the textbook, when you select one of these, it is going to show you the content across the book. So if I go and look at investigations, if I were in the chapter and press the investigations button, it would be filtered to the content of investigations in that chapter. But in this case, I can see investigations across the chapter, and that's true for all of these, from interactives to problems, videos, etc. So from the home screen, you're going to see content across the book. From within a chapter's navigation bar, you're going to see content primarily within that chapter. All right. So we've looked at navigation within the ebook and the structure. Let's summarize that structure. We have a structure of chapter, then lesson, page, and paragraph, that chunking. And we learned that there's a chapter opener to engage students in the real world relevance of the concept. There's a chapter study guide to let them know what they're going to learn. And then we have 1 topic per page and 1 concept per paragraph as well. Each section ends with a review, and the chapter ends with a set of review questions. Kane, any questions so far about this? No? All right. Anything that should be brought to the attention of everyone? Okay. Yeah, the access codes are going to be something purchased typically by the school or district. So if you haven't received an access code from the party in your district or school who would provide it to you, ask them, and they will be the person who receives these from PASCO once this is purchased. All right, so we've already alluded to some of the interactivity in the ebook. If you are viewing the recording of this, I encourage you to pause at this moment and maybe give yourself a challenge. Here are some examples of interactive features within the chapter we've been looking at so far, chapter 4. And you might use your navigation skills to figure out where these are and explore these a little more. But of course, we're live here, so I'm going to quickly go through some of these so you can see some of the enhancements that are provided in the ebook version of Essential Physics. So the first suggestion is to have the book read aloud the first paragraph of section 4.1. So I'm basically going to jump between these scavenger hunt challenges and the ebook, the student ebook, and we'll take a look at those. So first section of chapter 4, I'm going to click the chapter button and I can go to the beginning of section 4.1 and read aloud. Do you see that every paragraph of text has a little speaker icon after it? I'm going to go ahead and press the speaker icon after the first paragraph of section 4.1.
How do we describe speeding up or slowing down? What is the difference between slowing down gradually and hitting a brick wall?
And hopefully you could hear that. The book read that paragraph to me aloud, and it's a human narration, no voice synthesis here. And that's true for all the content across the book, alternates a woman's voice and a man's voice between chapters. So the entire book is narrated for students, if that would help them understand the content. So you'll see these speaker icons after each paragraph throughout the book in the student version of the book. So next scavenger item, have the book read aloud the Spanish term and definition for the vocabulary word free fall. All right, vocabulary words. I'm going to search for this one. So I'm going to search for free fall using the search button. Here's free fall definition of. And if I get to that, the paragraph's highlighted in yellow, I can see that the glossary term free fall, a new vocabulary term, is in bold blue here. If I hover over it, I can see the definition in English, and I can have this read aloud in English.
Free fall, motion of an object.
And I'll notice a little EN for English. For the vocabulary terms in the book, you can switch between 2 languages, either English or ES for Espanol or Spanish. And you can see the term in Spanish and the definition in Spanish and have it read aloud by a native Spanish speaker.
Caída libre. Movimiento de un objeto cuando
All right. So that's another interactivity enhancement in the ebook. Next item, a video animation of a cart traveling up and down a track. Well, video makes me think of the video button, and this shows us the video content, whether it's live action video or animation within the current chapter, chapter 4. And here indeed is a link to cart traveling up and down a ramp. And if I hover over this, I can see this particular video is an animation of that. So the movement along with the velocity and position versus time graphs that correspond to it. Next up, interactive version of equation 4.3, position in accelerated motion. So I'm going to have to browse here to find these equations. I think it's going to be after this. So I'm just paging forward with the arrow key. 4.2, here's 4.3. So here's an introduction of the kinematics equation for position in accelerated motion. And there's an interactive equation button in the sidebar next to this. So I'm going to open up the interactive form of this equation. And in this interactive form, we can use it multiple ways. We can use it to animate what is happening in a particular equation. We can use it to solve a particular equation. The field you see in gray is what we are solving for. So I can switch around what will be solved for. And finally, there's a set of challenges for students to answer problems using this interactive. So I'm just going to go in here and I'd like to animate the car up there moving. So I might want the initial position to be maybe 10 meters. And let's have an initial velocity of 5 meters per second. I'd like it to go for perhaps 3 seconds. And maybe the acceleration, let's make it interesting. Let's make it -1. So this equation gets solved for position, or I can hit run and see the 0 to 3 seconds of this equation animated with the car above, starting at 10 meters, initial velocity 5, with an acceleration of -1 for 3 seconds. So throughout the book, you're going to see when it is easy to, when there are visualizations for an equation, we try to animate that to give students a feeling for what this looks like in the real world. So example of an interactive equation. Next up, the worked solution to the test your knowledge question on page 115. Well, we're already on page 115. An additional element that's added in the ebook is test your knowledge questions at the bottom of some pages, so students can finish the page and then test themselves to see if they're getting the concept. In this case, it's a problem, a baseball is thrown straight up, and it's a multiple choice question. But in the ebook, they can try to work this out and then show solution. The show solution button shows not only the correct answer, but perhaps more importantly, it says how that answer was derived at, what equation or relationship was used, and it plugs in the numbers and shows how to derive that correct answer. So students can test their understanding across many pages of the book with the test your knowledge questions. Next up, an alternative form of equation 4.5, velocity when time is not known. Well, here's a little known thing. If I go to the end of a section, so here's the end of section 4.1, the key equations introduced here are actually hyperlinked. So if I'm looking at the one without time, I'm going to click directly on this link, and it's going to bring me to the page with this equation. What this question is asking is find an alternative form of equation 4.5. Throughout the book, not just with equations, but also paragraph content, you're going to find these more buttons in the ebook. When you click on a more button, the curious student can extend their knowledge, learn more about whatever the content in the previous paragraph or equation was. In this case, this introduces an alternative form of this equation, and it makes a connection with future chapters coverage of energies. So more buttons are available throughout the book. The book is 800 some pages long. If you were to open up all the more and print out that book, it would be about a third longer, something like 1,200 pages. So there's a lot of more content for students who want to extend their knowledge or are curious about a particular piece of content in the book itself. Next up, the worked solution to section 1 review question number 3. All right, so I'm in section 4.1 here. I'm going to go to the study guide because I know I can use the chapter index to get directly to the section 1 review. And it's asking me to find the worked solution for question number 3. Well, the section review content is in the physical book, as well as in the ebook, of course. But what's added in the ebook is the actual worked solution. So if I open up the show solution button for number 3, I can see it provides a graphical solution, the correct answers, and then of course works out the solution entirely. All right. And finally, one that might be easily overlooked, but is very versatile and powerful, a dynamic quiz generator for the topics in section 2. All right, so let me go to section 2's review. And at the bottom of every section review in the ebook, you're going to see an orange Take a Quiz button. The section review itself offers typically 2 to 5 questions, but we can generate, the ebook can generate essentially an infinite variety of questions with the Take a Quiz button. So if I press the Take a Quiz button available at the end of every section, I will see that it generates a 5-question quiz, a multiple choice quiz, and I can go in and try to answer these questions. Let me just provide answers so we can see the scoring that's built into this. And once I answer the questions, I can choose to score it. And it's going to show me which ones I've gotten incorrect, for which it provides a hint, and which ones I've gotten correct. Now, I could go through again and notice it's logging the number of attempts and my current score. Sorry, I pressed new there. But I can go through and work on developing the skills to get all of these correct. And in addition to the hints, if I just am simply struggling with how to answer this correctly, there is a show solution button that completely works out the solution. Now, I implied this was an infinite number of questions that can be generated. That's because every question, each time a similar question comes up, is going to choose a different but reasonable numerical value if it's a number-based question. So this is generating questions with reasonable but variable number values, and it's also working out the solution with those different number values. So students can use this for their self-assessment, or some instructors say, you know what, show me that you understand the content of this section by getting a score of 100% in 2 attempts, and you can put your name in here and print out those results and show it to me as proof of your learning. All right, so those are some of the interactive enhancements that are added beyond the physical book in the student version of the ebook. All right. So as we saw before, one other interactive that's included in the ebook is simulations. We looked at a simulation of sound generation, actual sound generator, a equation fitter, and there are other types of simulations throughout the book. And if you don't have physical equipment, I encourage you, or whether you have it or not, I encourage you to take a look at these. In some cases, like this wave interactions simulation, which has an investigation around it in the waves chapter, this is something that the typical high school lab doesn't have, a wave table, a ripple tank. And this interaction allows you to do things with that, allows students to explore that, even if you don't have that physical piece of equipment. In other examples, there are experiments that you simply can't do physically, like changing the orbital velocity of the Earth and seeing how that affects its orbit. And then there are some examples of simulations in the book, like Rutherford scattering simulation, that are things that are just not practical to do and are Nobel Prize winning work that are available in a simulation here. So this is available in the student ebook. I just want to note that some of the ebook investigation simulations are also available in the portal, extracted from the book. So if you are a portal subscriber, you can go to a particular lesson and look for the interactive simulation button, and that will provide you a link to the simulation simply on a web page that you could share with students if you wanted them to access that simulation outside of the ebook. All right, so that is a quick overview of the student resources in the book and the structure of the book. I'd like to turn our attention now to the teacher resources that are available to support this. First, we're going to look at what teacher resources are provided in the ebook and see that those are in the portal as well. And then we'll look at 2 online resources that are included with the teacher access, and that includes the Infinite Test Bank and the PASCO Academy. All right, teacher ebook access. How do you get to the teacher ebook? Well, in the standard way is very similar to the way that we talked about getting student access. You can go to the same website, education.pasco.com. And if you've never entered a code before, you will see something like we see on the right here for essential chemistry. It asks you to enter an access code. The teacher access code will have a form similar to that of students, except in the middle you'll see EP3-TE for teacher edition. And similarly, it has traditionally been licensed for a certain number of simultaneous teacher users and a certain number of years that almost always corresponds to the number of years that the student access code works. So this access code works for all teachers at the school, just like the student access code works for all students at the school. And once you put that in, you will get access to the teacher ebook and associated resources. So the next section of this webinar will focus on the book, teacher resources, the test bank, and the academy that you access here. All right. Now, this same teacher ebook is also available via the portal. In the case of the student ebook, the portal checks whether you have a student access code and essentially provides that to you. In the case of the teacher ebook is completely included in the portal subscription. So if you have a portal subscription, whether or not you knew it, you have access to the teacher ebook for essential physics, and by the way, for essential chemistry and many other resources. So teacher ebook access is included with the portal. You don't need to use the access code. You can simply click the button to launch the teacher ebook within the portal. All right, so let's take a look at the teacher ebook. We're going to take a look on the homepage that there are a few things that are different or more different behind the scenes. One of those is the test bank. We're going to look at the test bank at the end, but I just want to note that the teacher ebook, when we enter the book, has a similar homepage, but the test bank button is unique to the teacher ebook. There is a standards link. So let's follow that standards link in the teacher book and see how we can learn what standards are covered in the book and actually jump directly to them. So I'm going to click the standards button, and it defaults to NGSS standards, but we can go in and choose any particular state. If I were a teacher in Texas, I could choose Texas and then look for something like friction and search. Whoops, sorry. Let's look for another term here, maybe collision. And sorry, reset that. Texas collision. Thank you. Thank you, Kane. I'm not registering that. There we go. Thanks. Missed that. So choose the state first. Sorry, I didn't hit select. And then it shows us the full set of, in the case of Texas, the TEKS. And now I can choose the topic and search within that. And we'll see the Texas standards associated with the term collision. And in each case, you're going to see that there is a correlation and a link to it. And there's a type. The SB means student book. So SB assess is an assessment in the book. TE assessment is a question in the teacher book. And SB content is student book content. And whenever you're interested in seeing that content itself, you can click on the correlation link and it will bring you to that content, again, highlighted in yellow. So across states or NGSS, you can search for particular standards and jump directly to that content within the book. Final thing we'll look at here from the homepage of the teacher edition is the help button. And the help button is available in the student book and provides student specific information, but I want to highlight it here in the teacher book because there's teacher specific information. So from the welcome screen, we can go to help, and this is going to provide some quick video guides along with tech support information to contact us for questions, a user guide. So here's a complete essential physics user guide. It has moved online recently. So here's a user guide to learn more about the components of the book, many of which we're covering today. And then a link to a pointer to SparkView help as well. So supports in the help button, and the student version of the help button provides the relevant links to them, including a nice little video called Navigating the Student ebook. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the teacher ebook, and let's look at that same chapter, chapter 4, and look at what the teacher ebook provides in terms of supports for that same content. So I'll open the book and we'll navigate as we did earlier to chapter 4. And the most notable thing we'll see throughout the chapter is a teacher sidebar, kind of in the tradition of the physical book that had a sidebar of content. Well, this takes it one step further, and the ebook has sidebar content. At the chapter overview, we're going to see an important concept here. After the chapter overview itself, describing to the teacher the chapter itself, we're going to see something called lesson links. We've looked so far at the structure of the student book and seen that it's units, chapters, and sections. The teacher ebook introduces another layer on top of that, and that's lessons. What's a deliverable set of content? And although we know this particular chapter has 2 sections of content, it has 4 lessons. And there is content provided in the ebook to teachers for each of those 4 lessons. Where is that content? Well, if I click on the lesson 1 link here, it's going to jump to the first page of lesson 1 in the book. And the resources for this entire lesson are linked to from this teacher sidebar. So there's a lesson summary, pointers to correlations between the page content. But the main thing to know is that the teacher content is here in the sidebar at the beginning of the lesson. So we're going to go over this in more detail later, but we're going to see there are links to lesson plans, and you can just click on it and it will open directly in your browser if it can, or download the file. There's a slide presentation. There is student work, those student handouts we talked about earlier, and then the answer key to those. So we're going to look at the resources later, but the key thing to know right now is they are delivered within the lesson. Now, as you page forward through the book, you'll see continued if you're on a page that is in the same lesson, lesson number 1. And once we get to lesson number 2, there will be a new set of content. This lesson happens to include an investigation we see here. So many of the investigations, as we'll learn later, have videos that help guide you through this in a teacher-to-teacher discussion video. The final thing that is introduced in the teacher ebook sidebar in the book is when we get to the chapter end problems. I'll click the problems button. You'll see the answers to the chapter problems in the sidebar. And it's also worth noting that there is some additional content in italics in the body of the questions themselves. So you can look to the answers in the sidebar, and sometimes there's supplementary information for you, the teacher, in italics within a particular question. All right. So the structure of the chapter with the teacher sidebar, we have a chapter overview that provides links to the lessons within the chapter. The start of a lesson includes those lesson resources in the sidebar. When those lessons have investigations, there may be additional resources for that investigation. And then the sidebar provides the answers to the end of chapter review questions. Lesson resources are also in the portal, and the portal provides a convenient way to distribute those to students through an LMS. But it's the same content that's available. So if the lesson has a video, it'll be in the sidebar. It'll also be in the portal. The student files that we saw from presentations to handout assignments, the teacher lesson plans, and so forth are all also provided in the portal. So let's talk about the resources themselves. Every lesson in Essential Physics has a lesson plan. This will provide you context for the lesson, any equipment that's needed, and discussion points and ways to introduce the topic. And this is always provided in 2 formats. You're going to see a theme here, an editable format if you want to tweak it, in this case Word, or a printable, readable format, ready to read, a PDF. So lesson plans included in the sidebar and in the portal. There are slides. These are often quite extensive. The philosophy is we're going to give you more than you need because it's easier to delete than to create. And this is provided in the form of a PowerPoint slide deck and also as a PDF if you just want to view it or show it in a browser easily. There's also a set of notes that you can hand out, basically a 6-up view of the slides if you want to provide that to students for them to take notes as you go through the presentation. There is student work. Many of these are worksheets. These worksheets are provided as an editable Word doc if you want to tweak it, as a ready-to-print PDF. That's also a form that students could type into directly in a PDF reader. It's also provided as a Google slide. The Google slide would let you distribute it as a Google document. And the Google slide has the advantage of being able to accept text answers and also drawings. There's more detail within each of those slides. And then there's a teacher key. What should typical responses look like? Typical data in the case of investigations, that's provided in the teacher key, which is a Word doc if you want to edit it, or a PDF if you just want to view or print it. When an investigation, when a lesson has an investigation in it, you will see that the student work is the lab handout for students themselves, the investigation handout, in the same formats as a worksheet. And for many of the investigations in the book, all of those that use PASCO sensors and related equipment, there is a teacher video to support you understanding what does this investigation look like, how can I introduce it to students, what new tools are being used. So when there's a lab investigation that uses PASCO sensor equipment, there will be an accompanying teacher video. All right. So the sidebar content and lesson resources are really the core of the support for you as the instructor to deliver the lessons and guide students through investigations, book content, simulations, and so forth. All right. So we looked at the teacher content in the ebook that's also available in the portal. The next thing we're going to look at is Test Bank. This is the Infinite Test Bank. It's available in 3 different places. We saw that you can get to it from the teacher ebook home screen. We go to the home screen. It's available right here. It's also available as a button at education.pasco.com, so we can jump to it directly there. And if you are using the portal, you will see that there is a link to launch the test bank from within the portal. I'm going to launch it here from within the education.pasco.com page. And the test bank is designed to allow you to create typically end of chapter test questions, end of chapter exams, but we can create any sort of exam here. And I'm going to go in. I've already logged in. So the first time you visit the Infinite Test Bank via that link, it's going to ask you to create an account that's simply related to your email. That allows you to ensure that once you go back to this test bank, any tests that you created before, say last year or the year before that, is available for you to either reuse or modify and generate a new variation on. So I'm already logged in with my email. So I'm going to go into the Essential Physics Infinite Test Bank and show you how I could create an exam using the test bank. Let's say I want an exam that tests students' understanding of the concepts of chapter 4, the concept of the acceleration chapter. So I could say that this is physics. And for this, I like to say the name of the test, like chapter 4 exam. And my name. These things will appear at the top of the test. And all of the questions within the Infinite Test Bank are rated at 3 levels of difficulty, 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to open up chapter 4 to see that the questions are provided by section. And I can see how many questions are available. These aren't the absolute number of questions, but they're basically the question stems. And as we saw with the Take a Quiz feature, an infinite number of numerical values could be inserted within these stems by the test engine automatically. So if I was interested in reducing the difficulty of the test, I could say uncheck question difficulty 3, and we're going to see that the number of available questions from the bank goes down. But let's say I'd like to have maybe 3 questions in my end of chapter 4 exam from section 1 and 2 from section 2. So I can, I'm not restricted to a particular chapter though. I could throw in a question from chapter 3 if I wanted to, but I'm going to stick with chapter 4 in this example. And I can scroll down and continue on to step 2. And I can provide student instructions that will be on the top. I can continue to add additional questions, but the core of this is it's telling me of my selection of difficulties 1 to 2. It currently has an average difficulty of 1.2. And here are the types of questions that it has selected from sections 1 and 2. I can see the difficulties, the section from which they are taken. And I have some opportunities here to modify them. I can add additional questions. I can move the location of these questions. Change the ordering. I could swap it out for another question. If this isn't something covered or this is too redundant, I can choose to swap it, and it's going to choose another question and fill it in there. There we go. And I can delete a particular question. I could make a question harder. So if I thought that an average difficulty of 1.2 was not quite right for my students, I could choose to make the question harder, and it's going to bump up the difficulty. So this page lets us change the form of the questions and the types of the questions. And then we can go ahead and actually build the questions, the actual exams based on these question types. So if I'm happy with this, I would continue to build assessments. And this is where the versatility and infiniteness of the test bank comes in. I now know that I have a 5-question test of a particular difficulty covering certain topics in the sections of chapter 4. I can now choose how many versions of the test I would like. Let's say I am teaching 2 sections this year. I might want a test for period 1 and then a different but equivalent test for period 2. I'm going to name my tests period 1 and period 2 to keep them straight. And then I'm actually going to choose to build the assessment. It is now going to generate the requested tests. And I can go in and preview each of these tests. And I'll see that those 5 question types that I asked for were indeed generated. But the numerical values are going to be different between these 2 tests. So I see 6.1 meters, 0.98 seconds for the first test. And I see 6.3 meters, 2 seconds for the second test. So I'm essentially getting variations on these question stems across any number of tests that I want to generate. I could choose to print this test. By the way, copying and pasting this into documents like Word works pretty well as well if you want to just make this part of the content that you're creating. Or we can go and if you want to integrate this into an LMS, you can choose to download the test and its answers in a compatible format called QTI, Question Test Interface, either versions 2.1 or 3. And you could say upload this into an LMS if you want to administer the test via that LMS. How do you know if you're not having the LMS grade it? How do you grade it? Well, there's solution sets provided for each of these. There's a quick answer key, just providing the multiple choice correct answer, but there's also a full worked solution set. So if after the exam has been graded, you want to provide students the worked solutions for their particular values in their test, you can choose to print or otherwise provide the full solution set for the test. I see Joanna's asking a question about editing the wording of the test questions. You cannot edit the wording of the test questions within the test bank, but you can come in here and say, print the test bank. And I could, if I liked this question, but I wanted to tweak it, I could copy it into some other place where I am generating the rest of the test, say Word. And in that, I could choose to paste that question. And here I have complete control over that. Thanks for the question, Joanna. All right. Joanna asks also, I don't see a timeline for the lesson plan. How long is it expected to take? There isn't a particular standard time. I would say on average, it's aiming for a typical US class time of 45 minutes, but it does typically provide more content, especially in the form of slides, sometimes 60, 70, 80 slides, than one would expect to fit into a particular lesson. And as I say that, let me correct myself and say that the investigations are typically aimed to fit into a 45-minute period, but the investigations can be just one component of the entire lesson. So it's probably going to be something that spreads across more more class periods than just one. David asks, can you add your own questions to the test bank? You cannot add your own questions to the test bank, but as we just saw, you could use this as a basis for questions that you add elsewhere. So we could take these and add them to the test that you're generating elsewhere, like I started to do in Word. Great, thanks for your questions. All right, so that's an introduction to the test bank. Thank you for your questions. Another component here that can perhaps help us understand what a sequence of lessons might look like is the PASCO Physics Academy. First, I want to talk about accessing it, and then let's take a look at what it actually is. So once again, we're going to access this in the traditional way of going to education.pasco.com. And if we have logged into our teacher account, we're going to see a link to the Academy, which we can launch here. And it's going to show us the Academy content across 25 different topics. So I'll explain that in a moment, but let me first jump back here and say that if you are a subscriber to the portal, the PASCO Academy for Physics is included with your subscription, as well as the PASCO Academies for Chemistry and Biology. We're, of course, focusing on essential physics here. So let me jump back to the Academy and let's take a look at the components of the Academy. It's a set of 25 topics. And this can be used different ways. Let's look at the components, and then we can talk about the potential applications of the Academy. So I'm going to go to a topic here, sound, and I'm going to view this topic. Here's a quick synopsis. This is going to be centered around a particular investigation. And if I view the topic, we're going to see the same typical set of resources available for every Academy topic. There's going to be a summary. It's going to indicate whether it uses a particular investigation out of essential physics. This one happens to use essential physics investigation 16D, resonance and sound. We'll talk about this shortly. And then it links to teacher content. Other topics will point to third-party resources. And there are some files on the right, but these files will make more sense when we look at what's really the core of the PASCO Academy, and that is a set of 3 videos. The PASCO Academy was initiated at the height of school closures in 2020. And the goal here was the recognition that if students and teachers aren't in class, then what can we do to have students have as close to possible as a hands-on experience gathering and interpreting data in physics? So we came up with 25 topics based on essential physics investigations. And for each of those, we created a video or a set of 3 videos. Here's the video sequence. There is a teacher preparation video. And this teacher preparation video is typically 5 to 15 minutes. And this teacher preparation video is our physics teachers here at PASCO talking to you, another physics teacher, about how this could be delivered if you were remote, or thankfully, if you were in person again. So it talks about the resources available for the investigation or other topic in this lesson. And it also shows an overview of supplementary materials you could use to introduce it. This happens to be a hands-on investigation, but there are a lot of things that lead up to it, like simulations in the book. So our physics teachers here talk to you about the resources available to support this particular topic. They then talk about the particular lab that they are going to perform for your students in a supplementary video. Now, even though they're going to perform this video for your students in a supplementary video, you could simply use this as an introduction to this investigation for yourself. Good ideas about how to introduce it, tips and tricks, and just see how it works. So that's the teacher preparation video, letting you know the context of this particular topic. The next one is our physics teachers presenting to your students. And you can provide this URL to students so they could watch this. Again, this is essentially the substitute for not being able to meet in class from a few years ago. But that still happens, right? Physics teachers are sometimes absent and have a substitute. Students are sometimes absent and miss a lab period. So consider the applications of such a video in the current context in your classroom. So this is our teachers introducing to your students, talking to them as students, to the concept, in this case, sound, with some real world concepts, blowing into a bottle, resonances and things like that. And then they actually go and perform and collect data for the investigation that's in the textbook, in this case, investigation 16D. Now, the great thing about them collecting data is that they are going to provide students with this data. We'll see how that comes in a moment. And then they often have a teaser that talks about, now that you've seen this, how can we extend it, handoff. Fundamentally, though, what they're going to entreat your students to do is to take the data that they collected, that's available here on the right side, lab collected data, open that up. This is the same data they collected in the video, and to analyze that data using the instructions provided in the student files here. So students can see the video, the data being collected, get the data in the form of a file, and have the lab handout to work through that. So we think it's the best possible substitute to not actually being able to do the hands-on portion. And as with the other lessons and investigations, there's an answer key for teachers, and there are slides and things like that. All right, so that's the core idea behind Physics Academy. What if we can't do this in person? Over the past few years, we know that's happened in various contexts and continues to happen through things like absences and substitute teachers. So those are the resources available from the Academy for 25 different topics. The Academy was awarded the Best of STEM Educator pick for video-based learning last year. And let me see if there are any questions so far about any of the teacher resources we've looked at. Those are the teacher resources in the ebook and the portal for particular lessons, the Infinite Test Bank for generating typically end of chapter exams, and the Academy for supporting you to know how to do an investigation, or for providing to students if you are unable to do it yourself in class for whatever reason. Kane, any questions we should address about those? No, great. Thanks for keeping the questions going there. All right. So in the remaining time we have, I just want to kind of wrap it all together. And we saw that there was a little investigation there about sound that we previewed in the Academy. I'd like to think about, okay, we know that investigations are a key component of essential physics. We know they're embedded within the book. Let's talk about, if we wanted to do an investigation around sound, we might realize that there's investigation 16D. I'd like to ask you, based on what you've learned here, or half of you have experience using this in class, let's find some resources to perform and support this investigation. And I invite you to share your thoughts about where you'd start in the chat. What thoughts do you have based on what we've learned about how we could begin to learn about how to do investigation 16D resonance and sound with our students? And I'll note that I've chosen this investigation because it is a hands-on investigation, but it does not require any PASCO sensors, or so it can be done whether or not you have our equipment kits. Let's pause here for a moment and see if anyone in the chat has a thought on where would you start? Given all these resources available to both students and teachers, where would you start to figure out more about the gist of investigation 16D? All right. Thanks, Marie. Marie suggests I would go into the Academy. Fantastic. So we can go there. We happen to be there already. And the Academy is a great way to take a look at, well, how would a teacher who knows this content and has delivered it before do this? And the teacher preparation video would be a great introduction indeed. And what I like about the teacher preparation video is they don't restrict it to just content from the book. They will point to third-party sites that are beneficial. They will share the demos that they did as teachers in their classrooms. So that can be quite powerful. Joanna suggests in the chat, look at the resources in the sidebar of the ebook. Yep, definitely. So that is kind of the core here. So when we think about what resources are available for a lesson or an investigation in this case, I often think about the sidebar of the ebook, or equivalently the portal lesson resources delivered there. So let me take that advice and let's go ahead and look at the resources in the sidebar for investigation 16D. I haven't mentioned this, but all the investigations have a number at the front that corresponds to the chapter number. So this is going to be the 4th D investigation in chapter 16. So I'm going to head over to the teacher ebook and open that book as Joanna has kindly suggested. And I'm going to go ahead and when I'm on the home screen, I remember I can go to investigations and it's going to show me the investigations across the book. And investigation 16D, here it is, resonance and sound on page 460. So I'm going to jump there. And I see that, of course, in the student book, there's going to be the base instructions for the investigation, and we can get a gist of it here as students could. But of course, we want to look at these resources available for this lesson. So what is this about? Well, I can look at the lesson plan. All right, here is the content, the materials needed, learning objectives, ideas for discussion, slide presentation applications, and then comments about the investigation itself. In this case, measuring natural frequency of a resonance tube, guitar strings, and so forth. All right, and then key learning objectives. So this lesson happens to be around an investigation, and the lesson plan reflects that. Next up, the slide presentation. I'm going to open up the PDF version because it opens in my browser, but we have an editable PowerPoint and the student notes as well. So let's take a look at the lessons slides, and I'm going to zoom down here. There are 45 slides here. This is going to have background information, objectives, talk about things like resonance and pipes, and eventually we're going to get to a section that is specific to the investigation. So these are the slides I mentioned earlier that you could be projecting as your students walk through the investigation to help support them in addition to the handout we'll look at in a moment. And it even talks about specific steps for using, in this case, our SparkView software to take a look at the frequency spectrum of a particular sound source. So you're going to notice very detailed things that you could choose to project about the investigation as you work through it. You don't have to use these because some of this is in the handout, but this could supplement it as well. So slides related to the investigation itself in the PowerPoint. All right, what else is here? Well, student work. This is the handout. This is the thing where students will get the actual instructions and have the opportunity to respond to questions, fill out tables, and so forth. That's available, of course, in editable format or printable format. And then the answers to that, typical answers and responses, the right answers, the answer key is available. And then for many of the investigations, I alluded to this, but there's also a video, and this is a video that's going to share something in common with the PASCO Academy video, but it's very much focused exactly on this investigation. So it's typically a little briefer and talks just about what you, the teacher, need to know.
What are harmonics, and how do we create specific frequencies of sound, such as in music? These are the questions students explore in investigation 16D, resonance and sound.
And then the instructor goes through and shows the key points of doing the investigation, all of the parts, talks about the tools you'll need to know in SparkView if it is a SparkView based investigation. And basically it's one of my colleagues described it, I think, best. If you had just a few minutes before at the end of the day and you knew you were doing a lab tomorrow, you ran over to the veteran physics teacher down the hall and said, hey, can you give me the gist of this lab? This typically 5 to 10 minute video is the gist of the lab delivered to you as a teacher to help orient you. So I think both of those, the Academy and the sidebar resources, are a great place to start for this particular investigation. Let us actually kind of jump into it. I want to show you this investigation because it's one that does not require that you have the PASCO equipment kits. So I have this investigation set up here. Briefly, let's open up the student work. And this will guide students through this, again, with all those supplementary materials, including the slides you could be projecting. And this is having us open a particular experiment file in software. We're going to talk a lot more about software in the next activity, but I chose this one because it's kind of unique in that this uses our SparkView software to collect data for students to analyze without requiring any PASCO sensors, because SparkView can access the microphone on your computer to do sound analysis. And that's how this lab is set up. So let me quickly show you the gist of this experiment. Again, this is pretty much what would be covered in that video, but let me show it to you live so you can ask any questions that you have. And we're going to take a look at how this investigation might involve investigation 16D, resonance, and sound. So the instructions ask me to open up a particular experiment file. So I'm going to launch the software SparkView, and I'm going to choose to open PASCO experiment. And all of the experiments for essential physics are in the essential physics folder, and this one's asking for 16D, resonance, and sound. It's going to open it up to show me an FFT. That's a fast Fourier transform or spectral analysis of sounds coming from the microphone versus the frequency. So if we see a spike, it means that there's a large component of that particular frequency. Now, this is designed to be used with the microphone of your computer. I, however, am occupying my microphone from our Zoom meeting, so I'm going to have to connect a PASCO sensor that will allow me to work around that restriction. So this is something that you would not need to do, but this will, using PASCO sensors, be the focus of our next webinar part 2. So a preview of things to come. So because my microphone is occupied, let me connect a little sound sensor. The sound sensor is this little white box that will allow me to replace the microphone of my computer, which is in use in Zoom, with another source of sound analysis data. So I'm connecting to the sound sensor. Again, this lab is already set up for your computer microphone instead. So let me make that switch. And what this lab asks students to do is to begin by taking a tuning fork and seeing what this display, this FFT, might look like for a source of a simple sound like a tuning fork. So I'm going to press the start button and scale this. And right now we can see essentially a voice print. Here is my voice, the frequency components of my voice. So when I actually do this, I'm going to be quiet. What I'm going to do is strike the tuning fork, put it near the sound sensor, or I would put it near the microphone of my computer if I were using that. And it's going to give me the spectral analysis of that sound. When I get something I like, I'm not going to be talking, so don't interfere with this. When I get something I like, I'm going to hit the stop button here so I can capture that. All right. So I stopped that, and we can use the tools in SparkView to go in and analyze, well, what's the primary component of that tuning fork frequency? Well, it tells me there's a big spike at about 376 hertz. So if I did a variety of tuning forks, I could go through and see that these tuning forks vary in their frequencies. The next part of this lab directs students to investigate resonance in a tube. So we have a large cylinder of water here. You could also use a bottle, and we have simply a piece of PVC pipe. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that tuning fork that we just found the frequency of, which corresponds to the frequency on the tuning fork itself. And we're going to take this section of PVC pipe and put it into the water, submerge it, and change the length of the pipe that's outside the water, and listen for the loudest sound we can as we hold the tuning fork over it. So this will be done without the data analysis portion. You're probably not going to be able to hear this, but I'm going to stop. I'll get my microphone close in the hopes that you might be able to hear it. I'm going to stop when the height of the PVC, or the submersion of the PVC, makes a very loud sound. So strike the tuning fork, submerge the water, the tube in the water, and you may be able to hear that at that length of pipe out of the water, we get a resonant frequency. It gets much louder. So students would record the length of the tube at that resonant frequency and continue to do so for a variety of tuning forks, and follow along with the handout here where they're investigating the relationship between the frequency and the height as they look at resonance in a closed/open pipe. Yeah, Joanna, it is surprisingly loud. I don't know if you're able to hear that, but it did get loud. So that's part one, something you can do with or without PASCO software and equipment. Part two is going to be an investigation of the natural frequencies of resonance for a different thing, not a pipe, but a stringed instrument. So if we have something like a guitar here, and again, we can use our built-in microphone on the computer if you're not in a Zoom call, we would return to SparkView and we'd hit start and begin to investigate what are the resonant frequencies of various string lengths. So I'll use a particular string on the guitar. Get a little closer. And there we can see that that low E string was resonant at about 161 hertz. And of course, we can go through, change the length of the string. And in part two, students are going to be investigating the relationship between the length of the string and the resonant frequency. So an example of an investigation which isn't dependent on PASCO sensors, but it's a nice segue going from traditional equipment to sensor-based data collection, which will be the focus of our part two webinar. But I want to ensure you that if you don't have PASCO equipment, many of the investigations embedded inside Essential Physics are either simulations or use more traditional equipment. But we invite you to join us for the next session of the webinar. Part two is going to be focused on using the SparkView software that we just saw a preview of with the sensors that are included in our Essential Physics equipment kits. These include the standard equipment kit and the comprehensive kit. And some of the key components here are sensors like a smart cart, which is a suite of sensors that measures position, velocity, acceleration, force, voltage and current sensors, magnetic field sensors, and other sensors included with the comprehensive kit like sound level sensor and photo gates, so forth. So if you're interested in that, you can go to pasco.com/training and register for a live session. Or once we've posted these in the past, you can view any session recording to get a look at that. All right. So that's been a lot of information. I hope it's given you a view of what the essential components of Essential Physics are, from the student physical book to the ebook, to all of the teacher resources that can be used to support you. A couple of things I'll point out here. You're going to have the recording of this session to review in the future. But if you just wanted a quick synopsis of the core content, I want to show you that on education.pasco.com and also on the portal, there are two videos that I think summarize some of the core content that we've covered today in a way that is appropriate, one for your students and two for you. So if we return to education.pasco.com, down in the video guides, there is this video called Navigating the Student ebook. And if I were starting the semester and wanted to give my students a very quick synopsis of how they can use this ebook, this 6-minute, 44-second video talks about all the navigation that we've covered today in a short time. Similarly, there is a Using the Teacher Edition video for you. And this 6-minute video walks through and talks about all of these resources and resources and test resources available in the sidebar of the teacher ebook. So these two videos, Navigating the Student ebook and Using the Teacher Edition, I think are a great summary of the content that we've covered today. They're available at education.pasco.com. They are also available in the portal. One thing that is in the portal that's not available elsewhere that is relevant to today is we have courses, self-paced courses in the portal, one of which is Essential Physics 3rd Edition with Equipment. This is a course that goes into much more detail than we did today and actually walks you through some of the things we did today and much more, from doing an investigation to designing the components you're going to use for an investigation with your students, to generating your own tests. All of the things we covered today, you're walked through it. So this course is a certificate course in the sense that if you finish it and pass the quizzes that are provided in each lesson, you'll get a certificate showing what you've learned. So those professional learning courses, including one, Essential Physics 3rd Edition with Equipment, is available in the portal. So we'll wrap it up here shortly. I appreciate your feedback there in the chat. Thanks, Marie. The recording will be coming to you 24 or 48 hours. If you have any questions, I encourage you to contact your local PASCO rep. If you go to pasco.com/support, you will see links to reps both within the US and worldwide. And we'll wrap it up there formally.